Well, let me tell you the story about St. Andrews Hall. When I came to Vancouver in 1985, I came as Dean of the Presbyterian College at UBC, St. Andrews Hall. So a little Presbyterian college on the West Coast. And we had a $130,000 a year budget. So when I left, 16, 17 years later, we had a $1.6 million budget. And so this is about conversations that got us thinking outside the box in terms of what we would do as a college in order to generate revenue so that we could fulfill our mission, so that we could do the kinds of things that we had imagined possible. What we had was 3.2 acres at the heart of the UBC campus on a 999-year lease for $1 a year. So the question becomes, what are you going to do with it? And some of us sat down and started to imagine, came up with this idea of building a large residence complex on it. So I got together with the treasurer of the organization, and I said, I've got an idea I want to run past you. So off we went to the Vancouver Club. He treated me to lunch, laid out the idea. He sat back and said, over my dead body. So as I look back on this, this was a lesson in the kinds of conversations that get you out of a box. Whether that box is negativity on the part of an authority figure in the organization, or out of the box in terms of creativity about what you can do with the resources of the organization. So I had 4 options. I could have contended for my position for the rest of the lunch, argued and argued and argued. I suspect that wouldn't have moved him. I could have given up, gone away, and either complained about him or criticized him. Right? So contention, complaint, criticism. Those were potential conversations that I could have had. What I did, not sure exactly why, it was a gut instinct. What I did was to say, what would it take for you to live through this? What would it take for you to live through this? And he sat back, smile came across his face. He says, that's a very good question. Let me get back to you tomorrow. So next day he comes in with 10 questions of his own. Said, answer those questions, we'll talk again. So my colleague and I out at the hall went away. A couple of weeks later we had answers to 8 of the 10 questions. Came back in, laid them out for him. He said, all right, now you have my wholehearted support. And I said, what changed? What changed? He said, you took this project from a chance to a risk. He said, I won't take chances with the assets of this organization. He said, I'm willing to take calculated risks where and those questions were designed to make you think through option B, C, and D if A didn't work out. So I look back over that. Those are the 4 basic conversations that we have. I mean, most conversations fall into those categories. Are you contending for your own position? Are you criticizing somebody? Are you complaining about something? Or are you curious? Now, the first 3, contending, complaining, criticizing, don't create any space for anybody else. In fact, push people away. It's only curiosity that invites people into your space where they can then become collaborators with you. Now, they may push very hard in terms of thinking that the particular idea that you're working on isn't going to work. But that's what conversations do. That's how conversations get you outside of the box. They force you, curious conversations, they force you to think about alternatives. They force you to think about other ways of seeing things. They force you to think about things that you haven't thought of in this grand scheme that you've come up with and that you're wedded to. Right? So this whole session is really about how do you adopt a curious stance in order to convene conversations that really do create the possibility for innovation and creativity and progress. Very good question. So in the work Jazzthink has done, we've identified 5 essential conversations. We've actually created an acronym for it. They're called SMARTER conversations. So the acronym's for SMART. So the kinds of conversations you pay attention to are the soulful conversation, the mindful conversation, the astute conversation, the responsible conversation, and the trusting conversation. And if you follow that flow in thinking about your conversations, chances are you will you will maintain the space for creative collaboration. So soulful is the conversation you have with yourself. You've got to be calm, you've got to be curious, you've got to be appreciative in that conversation no matter what's happening around you. Okay, so that's your self-management, self-talk. Mindful has to do with how are you going to create positive alliances, constructive alliances. Astute then has to do with taking those alliances, how do you analyze and decide the best way forward, where everyone has a say. They're not all going to have their way necessarily, but they do have a say, they feel respected, their perspectives are on the table and can contribute to a new possibility that none of you thought of coming into that conversation initially. As you come out of the conversation then about what to do, who's going to take accountability for what, and what kind of support is going to be provided by the others. Because responsibility really boils down to both accountability and support. Organizations are great at assigning accountability. They're terrible at providing support when it comes to that stuff. And then the trusting piece has to do with what are you going to monitor and measure in order to ensure continuous improvement, continuous progress. And that's where you really do build trust in the team and trust of the team's work in the rest of the organization. So if you're talking smarter, if you're engaged in smarter conversations, then you're going to create the possibility of moving outside of the box through that kind of curiosity. So to get into these kinds of conversations, probably the most important thing is the soulful stuff. It's the self-talk. And how do you get into that space? A lot of us have, Marge Bussey was one of my profs in the Railroads coaching program when I did it 12 years ago. And Marge used to talk about the duck on your shoulder. The duck was always quacking. Quack, 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 quack. You can't do this, you can't do that, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. Oh, you're going to fall flat in your face. And Marge would say, just shut the duck up. Just shut the duck up. Now, that's not the easiest thing in the world to do, but that's where these kinds of conversations start. Right? So how do you imagine a positive outcome? Be curious about how you can move into that space and create the space for others. And the other important thing, so it's your own self-confidence, your own courage to convene the conversation through a question. But then it's having a clear idea of where it is you want to go. You know, so with the St. Andrews story, for example, where we wanted to go was to generate revenue in order to fulfill the mission of St. Andrews Hall. And we spent time becoming very clear about what that mission was. And so if you've got clarity about the mission, that helps with the confidence and the courage to create space to be creative about the ways to achieve the mission. So clarity about the mission, confidence about convening the conversations, and then keeping those conversations going by ongoing curiosity. The table will really be a conversation. So what I'm going to do is convene conversations about how to have these kinds of conversations, how to have these conversations that will help you and your colleagues think outside of the box. And so the takeaway will be a lot of their stories and a lot of their thinking about, we'll be using a little exercise sheet so they can take notes. But it's really thinking through and gaining the confidence to have the kinds of conversations we've been talking about.